Coming up this weekend in the Martinsburg area, the 2020 Libertarian candidate for vice president and first millennial on the ballot in all 50 states, Spike Cohen, will be speaking at the Libertarian Party of West Virginia's convention. And we want to welcome Spike Cohen to the program now. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Tom. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So you're on the ticket in 2020. Do you have plans for this election? What are your plans?
Oh, I haven't made any decisions for 2024. Right now, my main focus is on helping the Libertarian Party to continue to grow across the country. We have hundreds of elected officials, elected libertarians across the country. I want to get that number to thousands. You know, one of the biggest problems that libertarians face is people not voting for us, paradoxically, because they think we can't win. And of course, it's a lot easier to win when people vote for us. So that's the hurdle we have to get over. And the best way to do that is to show people how our ideas work and who our candidates are in their backyard long before they ever trust us to in the White House or in Congress. So that's my main focus right now. What the future holds, we'll decide later on.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of the ideas that you have, that the Libertarian Party has in general. And we'll start, of course, with what we're being bombarded with on a minute-by-minute basis, wall-to-wall coverage on Fox News of Russia invading Ukraine. And I don't know what people thought they were going to see when the Russian army started going into Ukraine. But, of course, we're seeing horrible things. We're seeing carnage. We're seeing buildings destroyed. We're seeing people's lives turned upside down, people being killed. That's what war is all about, unfortunately.
Yep, it is disastrous. And it is also the unfortunate logical conclusion of decades of provocations from the Russian side and from the U.S. and NATO side. We have to keep in mind that if we put ourselves in the mindset of a country that's being slowly surrounded by an opponent union of countries that are committed to containing that country, that's basically what's been happening with Russia. And then Russia, on their side, is causing provocations by, invading smaller territories of countries around them. And it's sort of this peeing contest back and forth, which has ultimately led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, it shows a lack of seriousness from U.S. legislators and policymakers and presidents, because the one thing that Russia's economy relies on is their ability to export liquid natural gas at a high price. If the price is high for fuel, then they do very well. If the price is low, their economy is in a shambles. So what do our policymakers do? Tell us to buy electric cars and refuse to allow new leases for federal land permits for oil, not allow offshore drilling, not allow deep water drilling, and basically ensure that the U.S. and the Western world are reliant on dictatorial regimes and authoritarian governments like in Russia for our energy needs. And that this is the logical conclusion of empowering countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia and Venezuela instead of our own oil producers and our own liquid natural gas producers for our energy needs. And it's very unfortunate.
Under Trump, we were energy independent. I mean, we were exporting more than we were importing at one point in time there. So had Biden, and I had a U.S. congressman tell me this yesterday, had Biden done nothing, that this thing may have been prevented. But because he signed the executive orders stopping the offshore drilling, the drilling on federal lands, and those types of things, and then we relied on Russian oil, that funded Putin's war.
Well, so that's partially true in that he did stop the drilling on federal lands. The offshore drilling, something that had stopped new offshore drilling had stopped, I think, during the Obama years and had not changed under Trump. What Trump had changed was the federal land permits. With that said, it is true, and this is the thing that the Biden administration keeps kind of trumpeting over and over again, I guess hoping that it's going to cause the prices to go down, is that where the U.S. has a record amount of supply of oil right now, that the U.S. is pumping and producing more oil than they ever had before. That's true, but the needs for oil are also constantly rising. Another big part of this is that oil prices are very highly dictated, or at least guided, by futures markets, by speculators on the commodities markets deciding what they think the future of oil prices are going to be, which means that the market is highly speculative and is based on signals that they get from the news and from policymakers. Now, we can't stop the Russian government from invading a country, or we can't stop different news things that happen that will cause, energy speculation to go up, the pricing for energy to go, speculation to go up. But what we can do is make signals that we're going to do something about it to try to bring down energy prices. And so far, all we're hearing is we're going to put up charging stations in the Midwest in a few years from now, and everyone should go and buy electric cars. In other words, we're not going to do a thing about the price of energy, and that's basically a giant buy signal to that market, which is driving up pricing. It's just, we hear about smart diplomacy. This is dumb diplomacy. It's dumb messaging that's causing the price of energy to go up.
So what would you do if you were in the administration right now? You ran for the Libertarian Party vice presidential ticket in 2020. What would you do if you were there?
Well, when it comes to energy prices, the first thing we do is undo any of the federal regulations at the executive level. Obviously, we'd have to work with Congress on any laws, but any executive orders, which is the bulk of the problem, that is in the way of the drilling and production of oil. That's the first thing that we would do, and not just oil, liquid natural gas, fracking, all of that. We would also get rid of the regulations that are making it cost prohibitive to build new nuclear plants. We keep hearing about the environment and climate change, because it's very dangerous to climate change for us to produce energy in the U.S. Getting it from Russia and Saudi Arabia and China, that's perfectly that's fine for the environment. But if we build new nuclear plants, which is the most carbon neutral and most energy efficient and most safe version of form of energy that we have right now, that would also help. We would put out a bunch of signals that the price of energy is going to be going down, and we would actually see that happen as well. When it comes to Russia, we would go to the table and say, listen, there's a lot of things that we need to go pull back on over the past few decades, including sanctions, including trade, and normalizing relationships. None of that is anything we're going to talk about until you leave Ukraine. When you leave Ukraine, when the bombings stop, then we can talk about the provocations on both sides that got us here over the past several decades, and we can come up with a series of step-by-step, verifiable de-escalations that can be done on both sides to bring us back to bring us to a normalization of relations. We're not going to Russia bait anymore. We're not going to red bait anymore. And what we are going to do is sit down, sort of like during the Reagan years, where we sit down and have negotiations on de-escalation and actually try to get over this. But none of that starts until you get out of the Ukraine. And until that happens, sanctions and things like that are going to be in place.
Yeah. What about the oil producers in the U.S.? Is there a way to encourage them to be making more oil and gas available right now?
Well,
even
again,
without even doing anything about the executive orders, can't they do more on their own?
They can, but the problem is you've got a bottleneck on the distillation as well, and that's another problem, is that they haven't allowed the building of any new distilleries for quite some time, which is a whole other problem. That's another thing that could be undone by executive order, and then later on there could also be, or through actually just repealing existing executive orders. Libertarians believe that things should be done through Congress whenever possible. That's how laws are supposed to be created, is through the legislative process, not by fiat of president. But what we can do is undo bad executive orders that are already in place in order to be able to do things like allow more distillation, new distilleries to be built. But the other thing is, again, this is an issue of signaling. If we are saying to energy producers, producers, we're going to restrict your ability to be able to produce any more than is currently being produced. And instead, we're going to go to countries like Venezuela and countries like Saudi Arabia for our oil needs. Then those energy producers are just going to sit back and watch the price of oil go through the roof on the futures market and produce the amount that they are now and make 3 times as much. I mean, it's common sense there. But if instead we're going and saying, listen, we're opening up the spigot here, and you're going to want to produce as much as you can because prices are going to go back down to a normal level, then you have more normalized pricing.
Instead, we're calling up the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, and other enemies. How that just does not make any sense whatsoever.
No, it doesn't, and it also completely sidestep. It shows the hypocrisy, right? Because we're going to take a stand against authoritarianism by putting the screws to Russia, and so instead we're going to go to Iran and Saudi Arabia and Venezuela for our energy needs. The bastions of freedom that those 3 countries are. I mean, think about a country like Saudi Arabia that is literally committing a genocide in their neighboring country, Yemen. Millions of people that have been killed by Saudi Arabia and Al-Qaeda. And the U.S., instead of trying to stop that, or at least, you look at what's happening in Ukraine, which is absolutely devastating. Saudi Arabia and Al-Qaeda have been doing that in Yemen for something like a decade now. And the U.S. response is to buy as much oil as they can from them and to send them weapons to help them in the genocide. And this is the kind of bad foreign policy that comes from a government that doesn't care about the rights of the people here or anywhere else. And that's a major problem. And until we have a government that respects the rights and the lives and property of the people, we're going to see this kind of bad policy that hurts us here and causes devastation abroad.
Yeah. So if we saw the devastation and the carnage in Yemen on Fox News, wall-to-wall coverage, maybe we'd feel differently about this. If we saw what's being done to minorities in China, if we saw what's being done with the slave labor in China, maybe we would feel differently about something. But Fox News isn't covering that.
No, and that's the problem, right? I know you're going to be shocked to discover that corporate media has an agenda of selling you a specific narrative on a day-to-day basis and to emotionally manipulate us into supporting different actions that go against our best interests. But that's exactly what's happening. If we got even half the coverage of what's happening in Yemen, which does affect the U.S. because that is being sponsored in part by the U.S. government, and also is technically an act of treason since it's the U.S. government providing weapons to Al-Qaeda, which last I checked was an enemy of the U.S. If you or I were to PayPal Al-Qaeda a single penny, we'd go to jail for many years, but they're giving hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons to them to carry out a genocide. If we saw that on the news every single day, we'd be just as outraged as we are, probably more so than we are what's happening in the Ukraine. And by the way, that's not to try to trivialize what's happening in Ukraine. It's absolutely devastating, like you said. It's total carnage. Ukraine is basically a piece on a chessboard from much more powerful governments. And frankly, it's because Ukraine gave up their nukes back in 1994 in exchange for security assurances, quote unquote, from the U.S. and Russia. They gave up the one thing that would stop them from getting invaded in exchange for an assurance that they wouldn't get invaded by the very countries that would either invade or help to destabilize them. And all these other countries are looking at that example of nuclear non-proliferation and saying, wow, do I want security insurance, or do I want something that's actually going to stop me from getting invaded? And this is going to have a repercussion across the planet.
Yeah, without a doubt. We're talking with Spike Cohen, 2020 Libertarian candidate for vice president. He's going to be speaking at an event this weekend in the Martinsburg, West Virginia area. And Spike, when we're doing something about this, Congress just passed a huge $1 trillion plus spending package. We're going to send $14 billion to Ukraine. In spite of the corruption there, I'm sure all that money is going to be used for humanitarian purposes, and those poor children and moms that we see devastated on Fox News, that they're going to be the recipients of that money.
Oh, absolutely. There's no way that they're going to use any of it to hire politicians and their children to get kickback money in exchange for more money in the future. This is also another thing that's being kind of swept under the rug. It's no coincidence that you've got we know that most of us know what happened with Hunter Biden being there in the Ukraine with their, I forget the name of their company, but their big energy company there.
Burisma.
And but there were what's that?
Burisma.
Yes, Burisma. But there were other politicians' children that were also being hired over there as well. There's also a problem that's not being talked about right now, which is the fact that there's a large contingent of neo-Nazis in the what's called the Azov brigades. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yep.
That are in the Ukrainian military as well. There are some major problems over there. And again, that doesn't justify the Russian invasion. It doesn't justify the shelling of civilian targets. It doesn't justify what it's going through. And I stand with Ukrainian civilians that are literally taking machine guns and rocket launchers and fighting against one of the largest militaries on earth for their homeland. That doesn't excuse any of that. But we have to have some perspective here that this didn't just come out of nowhere. It wasn't just that one day Russia said, or Vladimir Putin woke up and said, I'm going to go invade a sovereign nation next to me just because I want to. This has been building up over years. Putin certainly has blood on his hands, but so does the U.S. and NATO, and frankly, so do some very corrupt leaders in Ukraine as well. I think Vladimir Zelensky just kind of fell into something absolutely terrible, and he's only been in office for like 2 years. I think he fell into something that he was, potentially, I don't know, it remains to be seen how involved he was in that, but he kind of got dropped into something and is now having to deal with the consequence of decades of bad things happening on all sides there.
You mentioned that battalion. You're exactly right. I've seen the pictures of them with a Nazi flag. So our dollars are going to buy weapons for that battalion in Ukraine that has a Nazi flag. Yet if somebody even jokingly had a Nazi flag or any kind of Nazi symbol, they would be automatically canceled. They'd be fired from their job. They'd be removed from office. There is no way that would be tolerated here in the U.S., but we're sending billions of dollars to a group of people that carry the Nazi flag in Ukraine, and we're supposed to pat ourselves on the back, virtue signaling, tell the world how good we are because we care.
Well, and this is a long-standing thing, right? I mean, the U.S. has been arming people who often turn out to be our enemy for quite some time now. And when I say the U.S., I don't mean American people. And I think that we often get caught up in being, we're proud of our country. We're proud to be Americans. We're being robbed by a government, our government, who then gives away our money, millions of dollars, billions of dollars of our money to, in this case, a group that is heavily infiltrated by Nazis, as well as by, as well as to Islamic terrorist groups across the country. Every major enemy that non-state enemy that the U.S. has had, and some of the state enemies that the U.S. has had over the past several decades, were armed and in some cases formed and trained and given support by the U.S. military, by the CIA, by the State Department, by the Pentagon, and then we're shocked to discover that they turn around and attack us with it. It's almost as though the military-industrial complex is constantly setting up new and emerging target-rich environments in order to justify their endless warfare campaigns around the world and the massive profits that they get from it.
Hey, you got to have something to do now that your hobby in Afghanistan of 20 years is done. You got to have something. So, all right. So, here in America, we've seen the narrative shift, what we're supposed to focus on to Ukraine. But before that, for 2 years, the narrative was, stay at home, stay in mommy's basement, wear 3 masks, listen to Dr. Fauci. Where is he, by the way? Haven't seen him for about 3 weeks. And get vaccinated, get boosted, get double boosted, all these things. Where has that gone? And what was the Libertarian Party's position on all these COVID mandates?
Well, that's been memory hold, right? We were told that if we just did everything they said, that the virus would go away. And instead, each new wave had record numbers of cases because that's what viruses do. They mutate, they become more virulent, and there's not much in terms of public policy that can be done to stop that. The Libertarian Party was strongly against and is strongly against the lockdowns, the mandates, all of it. We were against all of it from the beginning. We were having in-person meetings back when everyone else was staying home. When I was running for vice president, Joe Jorgensen and I were crisscrossing the country, having in-person meetings with hundreds and sometimes thousands of people at a time when Joe Biden, we never saw him, and even Donald Trump was being selective about the events that he was doing. We have been from the beginning saying that these should be personal health choices that Americans should be making. It's none of anyone's business what kind of decisions Americans are making, and you can't stop a virus by shutting down the entire world and destroying people's lives and livelihoods in the process. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't stop the flu. It doesn't stop COVID. Any kind of virus that has that level of virulence, that level of transmissibility, which grows with each new wave, is not going to stop it. And anyone who thought that mandating vaccines or even just high vaccination rates would cause herd immunity and stop community spread of COVID, the Omicron variant would like to have a word for you. We had something like 10 times the numbers of infections that were in some of the previous variants, and it was during a time when a record number of Americans were vaccinated. So, and it's been each new variant is getting more mild over time. We've been saying from the beginning that people should be allowed to make their own health choices, including whether or not they go outside. It is none of the government's business.
Not far from where you're going to be this weekend, Spike, and we're talking with Spike Cohen, 2020 Libertarian candidate for vice president. He's going to be speaking at the Libertarian Party of West Virginia convention in Martinsburg this weekend. And not far from where you're going to be, we of course have a Republican governor, a supermajority Republican legislature. Our governor, who still has emergency powers, by the way, because the spineless Republican legislature won't stop him, won't reverse his emergency powers. Our governor had an executive order to shut down barbershops. And not far from where you'll be speaking at Les's Barbershop, a 71-year-old veteran barbershop owner was arrested because he was opening his barbershop. Now, that's the type of Republican politics we have here in a red state, West Virginia, that you're entering into this weekend.
Exactly. And here's the thing, Tom. I used to be a Republican. I was the most staunch conservative Republican you would ever find. And the reason I was a Republican, the reason I was a conservative, was because I believed that government governed best when it governed the least, that it should respect the lives and rights of the property of the people, that its only purpose should be respecting and defending the lives and rights and property of the people, and that anything else it did was completely unfit to be done, and that it was unjust, and that it wouldn't work. And then I became a Libertarian because I realized that Republicans were never going to actually do that. They were going to talk about it in the same way that Democrats talk about equality and fairness and then get into office and make sure that the multi-billionaires' pockets are padded. They would talk about endlessly talk about reducing the size of government, and then when they were in office, they would be just as tyrannical, maybe a slightly less tyrannical flavor of tyranny than Team Blue, but Team Red, in terms of the actual day-to-day things that they were doing, was remarkably similar to the people that they said that we had to vote for to stop. The other side. Mm-hmm. And this is this is again why I became a Libertarian, because I was sick of watching people like Les and countless people across the country whose lives were completely destroyed. Les now has a criminal record. Not only was he not able to do business, but he's now got a criminal record for it. And this has happened across the country where people have lost their ability not just to do business, but have been criminalized just for trying to open their store and do business like every other day. And it's happened under Republicans and Democrats. And I'll remind people that Donald Trump, for all of his great tweets and posts and speeches against the lockdowns, it was his CDC, his Centers for Disease Control, his Anthony Fauci that he never fired, who were guiding the different states in their lockdowns. The states were using CDC guidelines for those lockdowns. Those guidelines were created under another Republican, George Bush, during the bird flu. So Donald Trump allowed his CDC to put out guidelines that were based on a virus with a 90% fatality rate to be used on COVID, and he was even criticizing Republican governors who ended their lockdowns earlier than he wanted them to. It was great that he said he was against the lockdowns, and it would have been really good if he had actually, in policy and action, been against them. Libertarians believe that you own yourself, you have autonomy over your life and your decisions, and government has absolutely no business getting involved in that.
And I agree with you, and I'm right where you were as a conservative Republican. I'm sick of it. I believe Republicans hate me. Republicans hate my audience. But I got to get to the one issue where I just don't understand the Libertarian Party, Spike. And you'd say that you were a conservative Republican. I'm presuming then that you were pro-life. Are you still pro-life? Because the Libertarian Party is not pro-life.
So that's actually the one thing that brought me over to libertarianism after the one thing that I couldn't square that circle, right? The pro-life question, because the libertarian stance is that the government should stay out of it. And then I realized something. The government declared a war on drugs, and we now have, thanks to that, an opioid epidemic, cartels that have been empowered across the planet. Some of the wealthiest people on the planet are cartel owners who are wreaking havoc in countries around the world. It certainly has done nothing to help stop addiction or the spread of use of drugs. Drugs won the war on drugs. They declared a war on terrorism, and as a result, terrorist groups have been empowered across the planet. We spent 20 years in Afghanistan and billions of dollars to replace the Taliban with a much better armed Taliban and much better trained Taliban. The government declared a war on poverty, and the rate of poverty is now at or near the highest levels it's ever been. There's the growth between the lowest income earners, the gap between the lowest income earners and the highest ones is continuing to skyrocket. I don't want government to declare a war on abortion. I don't think that government is a good way to solve what is a societal problem. I think it's a much better thing for government to get out of the way of people who want to adopt and who want to be able to help mothers who are in a situation where they have an unplanned pregnancy. I want government to get out of the way when an adult woman wants to get contraception but doesn't want to have to pay hundreds of dollars to go to a doctor first to be approved for it. I want to get government out of the way of creating the poverty that leads so many women to make that kind of a decision because they already have however many children they have and feel like they can't afford to have another one. I think getting government out of the way does far more good than giving government yet a new war to declare against the people and the unintended consequences that happen as a result of it. And I think that the libertarian position on getting government out of the way is far better than anything I've heard from anyone else. And I'll remind you that Republicans talk about ending abortion, and then they get into office and they give hundreds of millions of dollars a year to Planned Parenthood. Every single one of them, including Trump. Trump made a big chest thumping of saying that he ended funding to Planned Parenthood, but he didn't. He just moved it over to Title IX through Medicare instead of funding them directly. And the amount of money they're getting now is higher than it's ever been before, and that's continuing under Biden. Libertarians don't believe that taxpayer funding should be used for any of this stuff. So libertarians would actually defund Planned Parenthood, and then we would get government out of the way that's causing so many abortions in the first place.
So, but if the U.S. Supreme Court would overturn Roe v. Wade, would you support that? Would I support overturning Roe v. Wade? I think it probably should have been a state decision to begin with. It probably should have been left to the states to begin with, rather than having a federal. And if it is going to happen at the federal level, it would have to happen through legislation. I think anytime that you have a fiat of law by the Supreme Court, I think that it leads to typically to bad outcomes because you have 9 unelected officials making a decision as opposed to the legislature that is accountable to the people that voted them into office. So I would support localizing decisions as much as possible in general. And that's what would happen if Roe v. Wade is overturned at the Supreme Court level. It would go back to the states, correct?
That is typically what would happen. Yeah. And now I will say this: when it comes to the way that they're trying to either to overturn or get around Roe versus Wade, like the SB 8 law in Texas, that bill incentivizes snitching through the civil court system. And we already see the consequences of opening that Pandora's box, where California wants to use that same system to try to go after gun manufacturers. And what they're claiming is that they can sidestep the constitutional question by not having the police enforce it, but just using the civil courts. I hope that's overturned, not necessarily because I'm against the desired outcome from the Texas bill, but because if they do that, then government will be able to prohibit or limit anything they want to, even if it's blatantly unconstitutional, by just using the civil court system instead of the criminal court system. And if they do that, then you will have the most tyrannical government that you could ever imagine. In fact, even more tyrannical than we could even imagine in our American mindset. So that would be an absolute disaster to give government that power to incentivize snitching through the civil court system, which is why I'm against SB 8 and why I've actually spoken out against other versions of it across the country. We've killed several attempts at the county level to try to stop that from being implemented in other places in the country, because we've shown them the Pandora's box they'd be opening. Oh, you want to ban abortions through the civil court system? Okay, well, we'll ban gun ownership. Oh, you want to ban gun ownership? Well, we'll make it illegal to criticize the president. And again, if it doesn't matter if it's constitutional or not, because they're using the civil court system instead of the criminal system, and that would be an absolute disaster.
I think we're going to hear more from Spike Cohen, not only here on this program, but we're going to be hearing a lot more from him. Spike, thank you for sharing your ideas. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. 2020 Libertarian candidate for vice president, going to be speaking at the Libertarian Party of West Virginia convention, and that's going to be at the Holiday Inn in Martinsburg, right?
That's correct. And I'm not just speaking. We're going to be shooting machine guns on Saturday morning, too. So if you go to lpwv.org, you can register for the convention and machine gun shoot with me. We're going to be having a lot of fun there in Martinsburg, and I hope to see you all there.
Sounds scary, but really fun, too. All right. Spike, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
All right.